This was a moment from England's third loss out of 4 games as the reigning champions in this World Cup. There's a lot to unpack here. David Willey, who was in the squad as a backup power play bowler, is delivering at the death. His attempt is a wide, high, no ball full toss that is slapped away to the boundary. This should have been the worst thing that happened to him in this game. But earlier he bowled another wide ball with third up that was easily guided away, and then Willey collapsed. This is England's World Cup campaign. Bad balls and collapses. So what the hell has happened to the dual World Cup title holders? This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager. Cricket is about partnerships, and this show was made in partnership with HCLTech. Yeah, the company you see on the Australian shirts. Supercharge your technology with them today. Do you know who George Scrimshaw is? And it is okay if you don't, and this just looks like an AI version of a Red Dead Redemption character. But George Scrimshaw played for England in the last cycle. Not only that, recently. He is a 25-year-old seamer with 61 professional games to his name, and only 5 of those in List A cricket, and of course one of them is an ODI match just a couple of weeks before the World Cup began. England's schedule was so bizarre that on the verge of the big dance, they had project players going up against Ireland just weeks before the tournament started. Their entire ODI schedule made no sense. Obviously things have changed since 2015 to 2019, that's fine. Back then they played as many ODIs as they could physically fit into the schedule just to get good at them. In fact, they played the most in the world. And after 2019, they pivot to T20Is. And it's not just them, you can see that other teams did a similar thing. There were 2 T20 World Cups in this time as well. But even so, England just stopped playing ODIs compared to how they had been before. They had the biggest drop-off of matches from these 2 cycles, and you can see the pattern. Everyone did something similar, but they were the only team that went from playing the most to the 6th most ODIs. And let's just quickly look at Pakistan and South Africa, who had the biggest drops with them. The difference being that those teams still played their most important players quite a lot. Pakistan had 4 players with more than 30 games. Their captain, openers, and number 4. The main part of their batting unit was absolutely ready come this World Cup. Now bad things still happen. Fakhar Zaman did not make any runs, but that wasn't for a lack of trying. For South Africa, they had numbers 1, 3 and 6 play regularly. This is the main part of their batting as well. Everyone knew their job and was completely ready for the tournament. England only had 2 players with over 30 matches, Moeen Ali and Jason Roy. And the former opener is worth talking about here. He was one of the players who said he found it hard to come back to playing ODI cricket after England stopped doing it as much. And he was the one they actually let play. But unfortunately by then, Roy lost form. Then he made a few runs, but they had pivoted to Harry Brook, so they got rid of it. And who replaced him in the side? Jarrod Malan. That was England's first intentional change. So it was partly Roy's lack of form, late injury, but most of all, there was a shinier new toy out there. Before that, Malan was being groomed for a position in the middle order or just as backup batter. Suddenly he was the opener. Every day this World Cup we will be going live at the end of the day's play with our show, The Scoreboard, over on our Jarrod Kimber podcast channel. I look at what happened on the field and also answer questions from the comments. And England's big advantage in their batting in the previous cycle was smashing the ball everywhere up top. Jarrod Malan is more of an anchor. His main skill is either being able to bat long or backing up positions 1 to 5 in the order. But he wasn't going to be the kind of player that Roy was. And Malan's form played a part in this change. So did the desire to get Harry Brook into the team. And I talked about that when he was first left out of the squad, that it didn't really make sense to play him in numbers 4 or 5 just because he really hadn't played a lot of ODI cricket at all. But England clearly wanted him, and so it was Roy that was out. But Brook was in the squad, and then in the team, he was actually replacing Eoin Morgan. Now, Brook is a fantastic talent, but he is not right now anything like what Morgan is. He's a completely different kind of batter. Morgan's main skill was part of the middle overs machine that England had. Can Brook do that one day? Probably, but not now. So usually what would happen for England is they would get an advantage at the top, and they would add to it in the middle without losing too many wickets as well. Morgan was the number 4 with Root and Stokes on either side of him. This time there was no Morgan. Root came in with very little practice. Stokes basically retired from ODIs, and then completely retired from ODIs, and then came back for the World Cup when he wasn't fully fit. And Brook was in the middle of those 2 guys. This isn't the same setup, they weren't as ready, and they weren't even all there. The other main strength England had in the previous cycle was all-rounders. They had a bunch of them, and they had probably even more coming into this World Cup. But let's start with Moeen Ali. England decided even before the last World Cup that he was not a sure bet to bowl his 10 overs a match. That didn't matter because they had other bowlers who could help out. In fact, he didn't even play in the World Cup final in 2019. But 4 years on, they didn't feel comfortable with any of their other spin all-round options like Liam Dawson, Will Jacks or Rehan Ahmed. So Moeen was back, and then they dropped him after one game. That meant that Liam Livingstone was now playing as the all-round. And he actually bowled well in one game, but for the latest match, they had to bring in Stokes, so Livingstone was dropped, and of course, Moeen was still out of the team. They started the World Cup with both of them, and by game 4, they were both gone. Of course, we mentioned Stokes, and he is another all-rounder, but he was too sore to even play as a batter, let alone as a bowler. And obviously the idea of a white ball Stokes bowling has never quite matched what he can do. But at least in 2019, they could throw him the ball. Now he needs a crutch just to go out and bat. But even without him in the side, they still started the World Cup with 4 all-rounders. And by the 4th game, they had 0, depending on how you feel about David Willey. Because Chris Woakes and Sam Curran were so bad with the ball this tournament that they couldn't actually continue to pick them. Before the World Cup, I talked about how England had extra bowlers in their squad. And that was a trust thing. And I believe that was just because they didn't quite trust their all-rounders. They started with 3 bowlers on their bench because they knew their bowling was potentially weak. One game in, they needed Topley in the side. And by the 4th game, it was Atkinson and Willey as well. That is because Woakes, who was their best non-archer bowler in the previous cycle, was completely horrendous. And Sam Curran, who won the best player at the last T20 World Cup, was probably even worse. Those two have barely been able to land the ball where they want. However, as bad as they have been, and they have been, Chris Woakes and Sam Curran are in the same cluster here as Mark Wood. And let's say you doubted Curran a little bit, and Woakes hadn't been as good with the white ball for a little while, and Wood was always going to struggle to recreate what Liam Plunkett did. Who on earth would believe that all 3 would be this bad at the same time? And obviously, not having Jofra Archer is a massive deal. And as good as Jofra Archer is at the top and the bottom of the innings, even he couldn't match up for the fact that 2 or 3 other bowlers that he'd be with were going through such an existential crisis. But as good as Jofra is at the start and the end of the innings, even he couldn't have made up for this many bowlers being in this bad form. And it's worth going through their losses so far, and there is clearly nothing pretty here. Against a 3-man bowling attack, they scored way under par with the bat, and then with the ball, they were messy, couldn't take wickets, and no one went at less than run a ball in that innings. Afghanistan got off to a great start against Woakes and Curran, but England took wickets, but at the end, they let the tail score way more than they should have had. 300 chase on a slightly helpful surface. Afghanistan spinners then completely got on top of them, and England could not stop losing wicket. And then the South Africa match. By this stage, they had dropped Moeen Ali, Liam Livingstone, Sam Curran, and Chris Woakes. Pretty much all their all-rounders. So they went in with frontline bowling talent of Atkinson, Willey, Topley, Wood, and Rashid. Yet they still let 400 runs go through, even though they had 5 wickets down at the 37 over mark. And then with their batting, they were 100 for 8. And let's be honest, they never even looked like getting to 100 for most of that innings. It's true that they didn't play a lot of ODIs, that they overinvested in all-rounders, they made some changes with their batting, and the whole Ben Stokes thing is still weird. But for all that, they should still be better than second last on the table. There is no way England should be this bad. They should have punished New Zealand in that first game. They could have beaten Afghanistan had they just finished off the tail, and they might have lost the South African game anyway, but they certainly shouldn't have been chasing 400. I mean, the big question they're probably asking at the moment is, how the hell did they end up at a World Cup with almost all of their players out of form? I think England could have prepared better. But not even they could have planned for their batters not making any runs and their bowlers all bombing at the same time. You could say that other teams caught up and that England aren't as good as they used to be. But there is absolutely no way they should be 1-3 at this stage in this World Cup. Oh, and you see this stutter? This was England's first delivery in this tournament. It started with a stumble and it ended with a boundary. Their World Cup has done the same.